Okay, there we go. Well, I wanted to start off talking today about the moon.
What are you doing there?
Ow.
See, that's just what you get. Talking about our homeland.
Don't edit that out.
Don't edit that out.
No.
Try to increase my reputation or anything? Well, I want to talk the moon because it has to do with Easter. Now, most people don't realize it. It has to do with determining when Easter occurs. First of all, Easter is determined by first the right, sure it is, of course it is. We all know it too. The spring equinox. They first wait for the spring equinox, which usually occurs in March. Well, always occurs in March, usually around the 20th, 21st. As soon as the equinox occurs, then they wait for the first full moon after that. As soon as that full moon occurs, they then wait for the Sunday after that full moon, and that one's Easter. Now you would think, wouldn't you, that a date as important as Easter is to the Christian calendar, that they would have an actual date. Christmas is always on December 25th. Why don't they know, you know, April 6th at 9:48 in the morning? They don't. They come up with this odd system. Well, this odd system is a very old system that goes back to other religions in the Middle East and has very little to do with Christianity, or what we now think of as Easter, and has a lot to do with the moon, starting with a god of the moon who was mentioned frequently throughout the Old Testament. Once again, most people don't realize that this god is mentioned all around the Old Testament. Matter of fact, the Israelites traveled across this god's desert to get to his mountain, so that Moses could go up that mountain to talk to that god. The god's name was Sin, S-I-N. The Mount Sinai, which means the mountain of sin. The desert, the Sinai desert. Well, Sin was a very powerful god throughout most of the Middle East in ancient days. Obviously. I mean, how many other gods do you know of that have deserts and mountains named after them? That really is how big he was. And his symbol was the full moon. So what do they wait for? The first full moon. That was his symbol because it was believed that's when the god Sin was at his most powerful. The moon is reflecting the most light possible. And so we get Easter based partly on him. One interesting thing about moon gods and moon goddesses is that they also represented something else. The moon, as we all know, goes through phases. It goes from a full moon at its most robust and strong and begins to shrink down until it disappears. In ancient days, what they said was the god had died. And then a day or two later, when the moon starts to reappear, it is resurrected. Every month. And since the moon was already connected with the idea of resurrecting, that god or goddess became extremely important as mankind became farmers. We had to know when to start to plant things, didn't we? And we had to know who to pray to. Because we wanted the seeds of last year's plants to resurrect new plants this year. So you pray to a moon god or a moon goddess. It's one reason why sin was so powerful. Because farming spread through the Middle East. However, there is another part of the story of Moses going up to Mount Sinai. Moses goes up to the mount. He spends 40 days and 40 nights up there talking to God. They come up with an agreement, which are the 10 Commandments plus the priestly laws. Moses comes down from the mountain carrying the 10 Commandments and the priestly laws, and what does he see? The people have already broken one of the commandments and he hasn't even brought it to them yet. Thou shalt not worship false idols. The people, while waiting for him for those 40 days and 40 nights, gathered their gold together and formed a golden calf and were worshiping it. So Moses decided that since the people had already broken the agreement, he broke the tablet with the 10 Commandments on it. And this is a part most people don't realize. He then called out to all of the people, "Who amongst you stayed true to God?" His own tribe, the Levites, stepped forward and said, "We did." And he said, "Good. Now take your swords and go through the rest of the people and kill everybody who worshiped that calf." They ended up killing 3,000 people. Later on, he went back up to the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and when he came down, lo and behold, nobody was worshiping a thing. But the calf is what was important. Because who was that calf? They were worshiping it. It obviously represented a god. And as it turns out, it represented another moon god named Mithras. Mithras had shown up in Assyria, Babylon. He was very old. At the time of Moses, Mithras worship had spread throughout most of the Middle East. By the time of Jesus, Romans had spread the worship of Mithras throughout their whole empire. There was one reason especially that a lot of people preferred Mithras over Sin. Sin was a peaceful god. Mithras, on the other hand, was a warrior god. That's especially why the Romans loved him. It was the Roman legion that started practicing Mithras worship and brought that back with them to Rome. But just the average Roman citizens were trained to be warriors. They had that mentality of a warrior. So a warrior god, this is great. And the calf is one of his images. Now here's how Mithras worship worked, or at least one part of it. You are a new initiate. And they're going through a ceremony once a year, usually around this time of year, where they are going to bring you into the worship of Mithras. And what they had was a bull, a ceremonial bull that had been specifically selected a year ago, had been pampered, taken care of, fed just the best foods possible, massaged, and this bull had just been pampered its whole life and taken care of. And on this day, for the initiation, he's led into the temple, yoked into position. There's a trench below him initiates line up underneath that trench below him. One of the priests of Mithras cuts the bull's throat. Not all the way, but enough that it bleeds. It will bleed to death, slowly. The idea being that the initiates walk under the bull and allow the blood of their sacrificed god to wash over them. Literally. Now, this was not washing away your badness or your transgressions or anything like that, because ancient people understood something about religion. A religion is a contractual agreement between you and God. Until you join that religion, you have not agreed to that contract. So they're not washing away your transgressions because you have yet to transgress. You're just now joining that religion. After this, if you don't follow the rules, well, they have punishments for that. In the case of Moses and the Israelites, Moses was considered their legal, if you will, representative. He entered into a contractual agreement on behalf of his people. So when he came down and found that they had already broken the contract, that's why he smashed the tablets. So it wasn't washing away your transgressions. It was washing away your former allegiance. Most people worshiped a god or a goddess or several. Mithras worshippers were only allowed to worship Mithras. And to be initiated, you had the blood of Mithras at his sacrifice wash over you to end your contract with any former god or goddess and enter into an agreement with Mithras. Well, in the Middle East, in certain areas, who was the biggest god? Sin. So when they said the blood washed away sin, they didn't mean evil. They meant your worship of the god Sin. You were becoming a Mithras worshiper. Now, where does the golden calf come in? Well, as soon as the bull is dead, it is done at this time of year, or even earlier, because they're waiting for the calves to be born. The bull is killed, and then the calves are born. And one of those calves is the new Mithras, is the golden calf. The priest would go out into the herds to find the new Mithras. So in other words, Mithras willingly went to his sacrifice to wash away your former allegiance, and then was resurrected as a new calf. But he was a moon god. Moon gods resurrect every month. But this was a special ceremony done at the spring so that they could go out and select the golden calf, the one that would then be pampered and taken care of. Now Mithras, because he's a warrior, and his symbol was the bull, his moon symbol, oddly though, was not the full moon. What they picked for him was a moon that resembled the curves of the horns of a powerful bull, the crescent moon. That was his symbol, which is still in use today. Look at any flag of any Islamic nation, and you'll see a crescent moon. Most of them don't know it, but that's from the old days of worshiping Mithras, the warrior. So then we come back around to Easter. Who are worshiping. They wait for the full moon. But Easter is not on the day of the full moon, is it? It's after the full moon, when the moon is starting to wane. The crescent is starting to appear. Mithras is conquering sin. But in truth, it's two gods contending with each other. And in all of this, it gets all mixed together. Until today, you have people who think that the blood of Jesus washes away the evil they have done. Which, by the way, was never the contractual agreement, you know. That wasn't how the Ten Commandments were supposed to work. I don't remember reading anywhere the 10th Commandments that you should follow all these things, but if you don't, it's okay. We'll get out an eraser and fix it later. That must be that missing mythical 11th commandment. The contractual agreement always was, you will follow these rules, period. Never the thought that it would be taken from you. Not that that was an unheard of idea back then. The Indo-European god Apollo, he did that. He was a sun god and an archer. And he had two magical arrows. One he would fire to punish anybody that broke the rules of his religion. The other he would fire to forgive them for their transgression. He was the sole judge. And I'm sorry to say it, but even back then, some of the historical documents show that you could commit every transgression in Apollo worshiping that there is, but if you built him a really big temple, you got that forgiveness arrow. Well, that's some of the history of things that most people don't know, don't realize. What we really have today is a conglomeration of religious ideas that were pushed together. Especially when you think about the fact that Paul took Christianity to Rome, where Mithras worship was huge. And the two started blending. But as for us, I think there's some very important points to learn from all of it. First and foremost is the thing that we know as fact and that every ancient religion has always talked about. Life is immortal. That's what they all talked about. Just like the gods, we too resurrect. We call it reincarnation. But even when they died, they weren't gone. They were just on the other side waiting to be reborn. The fact that we prove every day with our mediumship. Where did they get those ideas from? But I think one of the most important points that people have forgotten, especially in America and the Western society, you know, through much of the world really, is that as a believer, you're supposed to be entering into a contractual agreement when you settle on a religion. And it's not a contractual agreement with the church. That is a mistake a lot of churches make. It's not a contractual agreement with the religion. contractual agreement between you and God. I will follow these rules. I will behave in this way. That was a very important point to all of them. Even in point of fact, to Jesus. One of the major things that he taught was that the teachings of Judaism should be open to non-Jews as well. They should be allowed to convert. In other words, one of his major points of teaching was they should be allowed to give up their old affiliation and agree to this agreement. That doesn't sound like much today, but that got him executed. That was hugely controversial at the time. How dare you? Well, we have another Easter season upon us. Time for looking for baskets full of candy. I'm still hopeful. Of eating, well, all kinds of good stuff, especially colored eggs. Of having fun with colored eggs, like forgetting to boil them one year.
I boiled it.
Yeah. Of getting together with family, your church family, your family. But it also should be a time to remind us of our agreement between us and God. We will dedicate our life to your teachings. And by dedicating and living our life by those teachings, we shall be a guiding light to all the world. That they can learn to live this way also. That was a powerful message back then. That's one reason why they had such big ceremonies for it. Even why some people today still continue some of those ceremonies, whether they understand what it means or not. You know, there are churches that behind the podium have a large swimming pool so that they can bodily dunk somebody underwater. But then they proclaim usually that they're now a member of the church. It was supposed to be a big and powerful ceremony because of what you were agreeing to. You were dedicating yourself to a God. Maybe we need a big, powerful ceremony. Hmm?
I think so, maybe they do. Yeah, we got him.
We would dunk you.
Okay. Then we won't have a pool. Dunking booth, maybe.
That's what.
And I think it should involve, like, you know, chocolate cake and food and
Peeps.
the peeps.
Peeps.
Yeah. Then I assume by that you mean the marshmallow peeps and not my peeps that follow me. And you know that slang word is now completely uncool
What is?
when I've used it. Peeps. It's for people.
I didn't know that's what it meant.
That look who I'm
yeah.
talking to.
She has to give it to the teenagers.
Yeah. Anyway, that's what's behind a lot of it. That's where a lot of the teachings come from. Hopefully maybe you won't look at a full moon or a crescent moon the same. because it'll make you wonder and to think. Maybe next time you hear somebody say that they have been washed in the blood, you'll smile because you really know what it meant. It meant literally. And maybe it'll take a second for you to think about it, but rededicate yourself at those moments. Yeah. Every time you see the moon, whatever phase it's in, rededicate yourself to God. And with that, I'd like to close, and we'd like to take up our free will offering. Bring up the light so you can see into your wallets better.